The wooden mug slipped from Lyra's trembling fingers, ale splashing across the tavern floor like spilled secrets. She'd been Elena for 3 months now. Elena the barmaid, Elena the nobody, Elena who kept her eyes down and her voice soft and her real name buried so deep it might as well have been dead. But names had power, and some powers refused to stay buried. "Another round for table 6, Marcus called from behind the bar, his weathered face creased with the kind of exhaustion that came from serving drinks to men who drank too much and talked too loud. The Copper Crown wasn't the worst tavern in Millhaven, but it wasn't the best either. It was exactly the sort of place where a girl could disappear, where a girl could hide. Lyra grabbed a fresh pitcher and wove through the crowd, keeping her movements small, unremarkable. 3 months of practice had taught her how to be invisible, how to serve ale and clear tables and collect coins without ever truly being seen. It was a skill she'd learned the hard way back when being noticed meant being hunted. "You hear about the search parties?" The merchant at table 6 leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried across half the tavern. "They say the Alpha King himself is coming through these parts." Lyra's hand stilled on the pitcher handle. Alpha King. The word sent ice shooting through her veins. "What's he want out here?" another man asked, gesturing for her to fill his mug. She poured with steady hands, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. "Looking for someone, they say, someone important." The merchant's eyes gleamed with the particular satisfaction of a man who knew gossip worth sharing. "Rode through Westbrook yesterday with a full company, tore the town apart asking questions." The ale overflowed, golden liquid streaming across the table. Lyra jerked back, grabbing a rag to clean the mess before anyone could complain. Important. Of course he was looking for someone important. Alpha Kings didn't waste time on tavern maids or farm girls or women who scrubbed floors for copper coins. They certainly didn't waste time on women like her. What kind of someone? The question came from a farmer whose hands were permanently stained with soil, though his eyes held the sharp intelligence of a man who survived by knowing which way the wind was blowing. "A lady, most like, maybe a noble's daughter, could be some kind of alliance business." The merchant shrugged, already losing interest now that he'd shared his news. "Point is, he's searching, and when an Alpha King searches, he finds what he's looking for." Lyra finished cleaning the spill and stepped back, relief flooding through her like cool water. A lady, a noble's daughter, someone with breeding and education and power, someone who mattered, someone who was everything Lyra wasn't. She'd almost made it back to the bar when the tavern door opened. The conversation didn't stop all at once. It died in waves, table by table, as heads turned toward the entrance. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, the very air growing heavy with something Lyra couldn't name, but recognised in her bones. Power, authority, danger. She turned despite herself, despite every instinct that screamed at her to keep walking, to disappear into the kitchen, to find somewhere small and dark and safe to hide. He filled the doorway like a storm given human form. Tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the frame, broad enough that his shoulders nearly brushed the sides. Dark hair that looked like it had been touched by wind and weather, clothes that spoke of wealth and status without shouting it. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, silver, like moonlight on water, like the edge of a blade, and they were looking directly at her. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Something impossible spread through her chest, warm and golden and terrifying. It felt like recognition, though she'd never seen him before in her life. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. It felt like everything she'd spent 3 years running from. The stranger's gaze swept the tavern once, cataloguing exits and threats with the practised efficiency of a predator before returning to her face. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him, and the sound echoed like a judgment. Every instinct Lyra possessed screamed at her to run, to drop the pitcher and push through the kitchen doors and keep running until her legs gave out. She'd done it before. She could do it again, but she couldn't move. He crossed the room with fluid grace, weaving between tables without ever taking his eyes off her. Conversations resumed in nervous whispers, but Lyra barely heard them. The world had narrowed to silver eyes and the impossible warmth spreading through her chest like wildfire. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell winter air and pine trees and something uniquely, devastatingly male, her knees nearly buckled. "You're looking for someone else," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic and desperation. Her voice was too quiet, too breathless, but she couldn't seem to find more air. "You have to be looking for someone else." A smile touched the corner of his mouth, soft and patient and absolutely certain. He stepped closer. "I found her." The pitcher slipped from her numb fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of ceramic and ale. But Lyra barely noticed. She was drowning in silver eyes and the impossible certainty in his voice, drowning in the way he said those 3 words like they were a prayer answered, like they were salvation itself. Her world tilted sideways, everything she thought she knew crumbling like sand. She tried to step back and found herself pressed against the wall, trapped between stone and the immovable force of his presence. "No," she breathed, shaking her head so hard her dark hair whipped across her face. "No, you don't understand. I'm nobody. I serve drinks and clean tables and—" Lyra. Her real name fell from his lips like a benediction, and the sound of it nearly dropped her to her knees. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 3 years, had almost convinced herself it belonged to someone else, someone who'd died in flames and screaming and blood, someone who'd never been meant to survive. "How do you—" The words stuck in her throat. She pressed herself harder against the wall, as if she could somehow disappear into the stone. "That's not my name. My name is Elena. Elena Reeves." He shook his head slowly, never breaking eye contact. "No, sweetheart, it isn't." The endearment hit her like a physical blow, sweet and gentle and impossible, spoken in a voice that sounded like it had been waiting years to say her name. "You don't understand," she said again, desperation clawing at her chest. "Whoever you're looking for, whatever you need, it isn't me. It can't be me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. The contact sent sparks racing across her skin, golden warmth that had nothing to do with the tavern's firelight. "I've been searching for you for 2 years," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I've ridden through every village, every town, every city from here to the northern borders. I've followed rumours and whispers, and the pull of something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore." His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and she shivered at the contact. "I know your face, Lyra. I know your voice. I know the way you try to make yourself small, like if you just disappear enough, the world will forget you exist." His silver eyes searched hers, seeing too much, seeing everything she'd tried so hard to hide. "But I could never forget you. I could never stop looking." "You're wrong." The words came out as barely a whisper. "You have to be wrong." Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, or understanding. "I know you're afraid," he said softly. "I know you've been running. I know you think you're nothing special, that you're not worth finding." His hand moved to cup her face fully, thumb brushing across her lips. "But you're wrong, sweetheart. You're everything." Before she could respond, before she could process the impossible certainty in his voice, he was moving. His free hand shot out to catch her wrist, just as her survival instincts finally kicked in and she tried to bolt for the kitchen. The moment his skin touched hers, the world exploded. Golden light burst behind her eyes, warm and perfect and terrifying. She felt the bond snap into place like a chain made of starlight, binding her to this stranger who somehow wasn't a stranger at all. Every wall she'd built, every defence she'd crafted, every lie she'd told herself about who she was and what she was worth, all of it crumbled in the face of that connection. Mine, something deep in her chest whispered. Ours, home? She jerked back with a gasp, breaking the contact, but the damage was done. The bond hummed between them like a living thing, impossible to ignore. He smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. Now, do you believe me? The silence stretched between them like a held breath, thick with possibility and terror. Every eye in the tavern had turned their way, drawn by the shattered pitcher and the stranger who commanded attention simply by existing. Lyra felt exposed, pinned like a butterfly under glass, her carefully constructed invisibility stripped away in the span of 3 impossible words. I found her. My name is Kieran, he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone, despite the audience surrounding them. Kieran Blackmore, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Alpha King. The title hit her like ice water, confirming what every instinct had already whispered. This wasn't some travelling merchant or minor lord. This was power incarnate, authority that could reshape kingdoms with a word. And he was looking at her like she mattered. That's impossible, she breathed, shaking her head hard enough to make her vision blur. You can't be. Alpha Kings don't come to places like this. They don't look for people like me. Something flickered across his expression. Pain, maybe, or recognition of an old wound. People like you, he repeated softly. And what kind of people is that, Lyra? Her false name felt strange on her tongue now, tainted by the truth he'd spoken. Broken people, dangerous people, people who bring death wherever they go. His silver eyes darkened, and for a moment she saw something fierce and protective flash in their depths. Is that what you think you are? She opened her mouth to say yes, because it was the truth, because it was the only truth she'd known for 3 years, but the words wouldn't come. Not under the weight of his gaze, not with the golden thread still humming between them like a living thing. I think, she said instead, her voice barely above a whisper, that you have me confused with someone else, someone important. Kieran stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to catch his scent again. Pine forests and winter air, and something that made her think of home, though she'd never had one worth remembering. Lyra Ashworth, he said, and her surname fell from his lips like a caress. Born in Thornfield Village 23 years ago, daughter of Marcus Ashworth, the village healer, and Elena Ashworth, who could make flowers bloom in winter and rain fall in drought. Each word was a knife between her ribs, cutting through the careful lies she'd wrapped around herself. She pressed back against the wall, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from the truth in his voice. Your mother taught you to tend wounds with more than herbs and thread, he continued, his voice gentle but implacable. Taught you that some gifts run deeper than skill, that some healing comes from within. You were 17 when the fire came. 17 when Lord Blackthorn's men burned your village, searching for the witch who'd been helping his enemies. Stop! The word came out as a sob, raw and broken. Please, just stop. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not when she was finally hearing her own story spoken aloud after years of silence. You tried to save them, he said, and now his voice was impossibly gentle, devastatingly kind. Your parents, your neighbours, everyone you'd ever loved. You poured everything you had into trying to heal burns that were too deep, too widespread, and when your power finally broke, they died anyway. The words tore from her throat like shattered glass. Everyone died anyway, and it was my fault. If I hadn't tried to heal them, if I hadn't used magic where Blackthorn's men could sense it, they would have died regardless. His hand moved to touch her face again, thumb brushing away tears she didn't realise were falling. Blackthorn wanted to make an example. He would have killed everyone in that village, whether you'd used your gift or not. You don't know that. I do. His certainty was absolute, unshakable. Because I was there 3 days later, I saw what he left behind. The world tilted sideways. What? I'd been tracking him for months. following the trail of villages he'd burned, families he'd destroyed, all in the name of rooting out magic users who dared to help his political enemies. Kieran's jaw tightened, silver eyes flashing with old anger. I was too late to save Thornfield. Too late to save your family. But I found the survivor reports, the stories of a girl with healing magic who tried to save everyone and vanished when she failed. Lyra stared at him, her mind reeling. That's impossible. No one survived to tell stories. I made sure of that. Old Henrik survived, found him in the woods 2 miles out, burned but alive. He told me about Marcus Ashworth's daughter, about how she'd tried to heal half the village before disappearing into the night. Kieran's voice softened. He said you blamed yourself, said you'd sworn you'd never use magic again. Never let anyone else get hurt because of what you were. The breath left her lungs in a rush. Henrik! She'd forgotten about Henrik, the village drunk who'd been passed out in the forest when the attack came. She'd been so focused on the dead that she'd never thought. How do you know all this? She whispered. Because I've been looking for you ever since. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like spending 2 years searching for a traumatized healer was exactly what Alpha Kings did with their time. The mate bond doesn't lie, Lyra. I felt you the moment your power broke that night, felt your pain, your guilt, your absolute certainty that you were cursed. Mate bond. The word sent electricity racing down her spine. That's not possible, she said, but even to her own ears it sounded weak. Mate bonds are rare. They happen to important people, powerful people. They happen to the people they're meant to happen to. His thumb traced across her cheekbone, and she shivered at the contact. Power recognizes power, Lyra, and you are far more powerful than you know. Before she could respond, before she could voice another denial, Marcus cleared his throat behind them. Begging your pardon, sir, but you're drawing quite a crowd. Lyra jolted, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes still fixed on them. Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized how they must look. Her backed against the wall, him close enough to be intimate, both of them speaking in hushed tones while she cried. Of course. Kieran stepped back, giving her space to breathe, but his eyes never left her face. Is there somewhere private we can speak? Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing the wisdom of getting involved with whatever this was. But gold spoke louder than caution, and Kieran was already reaching into his coat. The back room, Marcus said, pocketing the coins without counting them. Through the kitchen. Nobody will bother you there. Kieran nodded and turned back to Lyra, extending his hand palm up. An invitation, not a demand. Will you trust me that much? He asked softly. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everything logical, everything safe, everything that had kept her alive for 3 years screamed at her to run, to slip through the kitchen, out the back door, and disappear into the forest before he could follow. But the golden thread between them hummed with warmth and promise, and she was so tired of running. She placed her hand in his. The contact sent sparks racing up her arm, that same impossible recognition flooding her system. His fingers closed around hers, gentle but secure, and for the first time in years she felt safe. The back room was small and dusty, furnished with nothing but a few crates and a single guttering candle. Kieran released her hand to light a proper lamp, filling the space with warm yellow light that seemed to chase away the shadows in her chest. "Tell me why you don't believe it," he said, settling onto a crate and watching her with those impossibly patient eyes. "Tell me why you think I'm wrong." Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the lamp's warmth. "Because I've seen what I am. I've seen what happens when I try to help people." "You've seen what happens when you exhaust yourself trying to heal mortal wounds with broken power." His voice was matter-of-fact, clinical almost. "That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" She laughed, and it came out bitter and sharp. "My magic is poisoned, Kieran, corrupted. Every time I've tried to use it since that night, people get hurt." "Show me." The words hung between them like a challenge. Lyra shook her head immediately. "No, I can't. I won't." "You cut your hand yesterday," he said quietly, and her eyes snapped to his in shock. "On broken glass while cleaning. I can smell the blood, see the way you're favouring your left side. Show me." "How do you know that?" "Alpha senses are sharp, and you're my mate. I can feel your pain like it's my own." He stood slowly, moving toward her with careful, non-threatening steps. "Show me what you think is corrupted." With trembling fingers, Lyra unwrapped the makeshift bandage around her palm. The cut was shallow but long, still weeping blood despite a day of healing. She'd wrapped it tight to avoid staining anything, but it throbbed with every heartbeat. "Now," Kieran said softly, "heal it." "I can't." "You can. You just don't trust yourself." He reached out to touch her wrist, just above the wound. "I'm here. If something goes wrong, I'll stop you, but nothing will go wrong, Lyra, I promise." She wanted to argue, to refuse, to run. But he was looking at her like she was precious, like she was worth saving, and she was so tired of carrying this fear alone. Taking a shaky breath, she closed her eyes and reached for the power that had been dormant for months. It came easily. Too easily, golden light flowing from her fingers like liquid sunlight. But instead of the sick, twisted thing she'd felt for 3 years, it felt clean, pure, right. The cut closed without pain, without effort, skin knitting together, as if it had never been broken. Lyra opened her eyes and stared at her unmarked palm, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How?" she whispered. Kieran smiled, and it was like watching stars being born. "Because you're not broken, sweetheart. You never were." He cupped her face in both hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "Your power was never corrupted. It was grieving." Before she could respond, before she could process what that meant, the sound of horses reached them through the walls, many horses moving fast. Kieran's entire body went rigid, protective instincts flaring. "How many exits does this place have?" "2, Lyra said automatically. "Front door and kitchen door, why?" Instead of answering, he moved to the small window and peered out. What he saw made his jaw clench and his eyes flash with something dangerous. "Blackthorn's men," he said quietly. 30 of them, maybe more. They're surrounding the building." Terror flooded Lyra's system, ice-cold and paralysing. "He found me." "No." Kieran's voice was absolutely certain, absolutely calm. "He found me, and that's exactly what I wanted." He turned back to her, silver eyes blazing with protective fury. "Stay behind me," he said, and there was nothing human in his voice anymore. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, stay behind me." The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire building. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the tavern like thunder, followed by the heavy footsteps of armed men. Shouts erupted from the main room, Marcus barking orders, patrons scrambling for exits, the harsh voices of soldiers demanding answers. Kieran moved like liquid shadow, positioning himself between Lyra and the door with predatory grace. The gentle patience that had marked his every interaction with her was gone, replaced by something fierce and deadly. This was the Alpha King, she realised. This was the man who ruled through strength and protected what was his. "The girl," a voice called from the main room, cold and authoritative. "We know she's here. Hand her over, and no one else has to die." Lyra's blood turned to ice. She recognised that voice, had heard it in nightmares for 3 years. Captain Roderick, Blackthorn's right hand, the man who'd personally lit the torch that burned down Thornfield. "There's no girl here," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the obvious terror. "Just travellers and locals having a drink." A sound like a slap echoed through the walls, followed by Marcus's grunt of pain. "Don't lie to me, old man. We tracked her scent to this building, the witch who killed Lord Blackthorn's son." Witch. Killer. The words hit Lyra like physical blows, confirming every terrible thing she'd believed about herself. She pressed a hand to her mouth to muffle the sob that threatened to escape. Kieran's head turned slightly, silver eyes finding hers in the lamplight. What she saw there made her breath catch, not disgust or fear or the revulsion she expected, but fury. Pure, molten rage directed entirely at the men who dared to hunt her. "You didn't kill anyone," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Blackthorn's son died of his own stupidity and cruelty. You healed 2 of his victims, nothing more." "How do you—" "Because I investigated. Because I know the difference between healing magic and death magic." His expression gentled slightly. "Because I know you, Lyra. Every instinct you possess, every choice you've made. You couldn't kill if your life depended on it." Another crash from the main room, followed by the sound of tables being overturned. They were searching systematically, and it would only be minutes before they reached the back room. "We have to run," Lyra whispered, panic clawing at her chest. "There's a window. We can slip out while they're distracted." "No." Kieran's voice was absolute, unshakable. "No more running. You don't understand. These men, they'll kill you just for helping me. Blackthorn doesn't leave witnesses." "Let them try." The words came out as a growl, and for a moment she saw something inhuman flash in his eyes, something wild and dangerous and utterly protective. "I've been hunting Blackthorn for 2 years, Lyra. He's committed atrocities across 3 kingdoms in the name of rooting out magic users. It's time someone stopped him." The footsteps were getting closer, heavy boots echoing through the kitchen. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she realised they were trapped. Kieran was powerful, but 30 armed men was 30 armed men. Even an Alpha King had limits. "Please," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Please don't die for me. I'm not worth it." His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady and absolutely certain. "You're worth everything," he said simply. "And I'm not going to die. We're not going to die. Trust me." Before she could argue, the door to the back room burst open. Captain Roderick stood framed in the doorway, a mountain of a man in black leather and steel. His face was scarred from some long-ago battle, his eyes the flat grey of winter storms. Behind him pressed a handful of soldiers, crossbows raised and ready. "There you are," he said, and his voice was like gravel, grinding against stone. 3 years I've been hunting you, little witch. 3 years of following whispers and rumours and the trail of magical incidents you've left in your wake." Lyra shrank back against the wall, every nightmare she'd ever had coming to life. But Kieran didn't move, didn't even seem concerned by the weapons pointed at his chest. "Captain Roderick," he said conversationally, "still doing Blackthorn's dirty work, I see." Roderick's eyes narrowed as he took in Kieran's expensive clothes, the easy authority in his stance. "And you are?" "Someone who's going to give you exactly 1 chance to walk away." Kieran's voice was silk over steel. "Take your men and leave. Never come back. Consider it a mercy." Roderick laughed, a harsh sound that made Lyra flinch. "Mercy? From some lordling who thinks he can play hero? Do you have any idea who you're protecting?" "I know exactly who I'm protecting." Kieran stepped forward, and something in his movement made the soldiers tense. "The question is whether you know who you're threatening." "A murderer," Roderick spat. "A witch who killed Lord Blackthorn's heir with dark magic. She's wanted for execution across 3 kingdoms." "Thomas Blackthorn died choking on his own blood after trying to rape a village girl," Kieran said calmly. "Lyra healed the girl's injuries and helped her escape. If that makes her a murderer in your eyes, then your justice is as corrupted as your lord." The casual way he dismantled their accusations made Lyra's head spin. He spoke like someone who'd been there, who'd investigated every detail. Like he knew exactly what had happened that night when she tried to help Thomas's victim and ended up fleeing for her life. "Pretty words," Roderick snarled, "but words won't save either of you. Stand aside and I might let you live." Kieran smiled, and it was all teeth and predatory promise. No. The word hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Roderick raised his crossbow. The world slowed to honey-thick moments. Lyra saw the captain's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the bolt flying toward Kieran's chest, saw her own hand moving without conscious thought. Golden light erupted from her palm, not to heal, but to protect. A shield of pure energy formed between Kieran and the crossbow bolt, sending the projectile ricocheting into the wall with a crack like thunder. The silence that followed was deafening. "Impossible!" one of the soldiers breathed. Lyra stared at her own hand in shock. She'd never done anything like that before, never even known she could. But the power had come as naturally as breathing, driven by desperation and the absolute need to keep Kieran safe. "Protective magic," Kieran said softly, wonder in his voice. "Not healing, protection." Roderick recovered first, his scarred face twisting with rage. "Kill them both!" chaos erupted. Crossbow bolts filled the air, but Lyra's shield held, golden light deflecting every shot. Kieran moved like lightning, faster than any human had a right to, and suddenly his form was shifting, bones stretching and muscles expanding. The wolf that emerged where Kieran had stood was massive, silver-grey and deadly, with eyes like molten mercury. He leapt over Lyra's shield with fluid grace, landing among the soldiers like a force of nature. The fight was brief and brutal. Men screamed and scattered, some fleeing entirely, others trying desperately to reload crossbows with shaking hands. But they were facing an Alpha King in his true form, a predator built for battle, and they never stood a chance. When the dust settled, Roderick lay unconscious against the far wall. His remaining men either fled or incapacitated. The wolf padded back to where Lyra knelt, her shield flickering and fading as exhaustion hit her like a wave. The transformation back to human form was as fluid as the first, bones shifting and fur melting away until Kieran stood before her again, completely unharmed but breathing hard. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, kneeling beside her and running gentle hands over her arms, checking for injuries she didn't have. "I'm fine," her voice came out as a whisper. "How did I do that? The shield, I've never—" "You protected your mate." His hands stilled on her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "It's the most natural magic there is." Mate. The word sent warmth spiralling through her chest, chasing away the lingering terror. She'd protected him. She'd used her power to save someone instead of failing to save them, and it had worked. "We need to leave," Kieran said gently. "Roderick will recover eventually, and he'll bring reinforcements. Can you travel?" Lyra nodded, though her legs felt like water. The magical exertion had drained her more than she'd expected, but adrenaline would carry her for now. They slipped through the kitchen and out the back door, leaving the unconscious soldiers behind. The forest beckoned beyond the village edges, dark and welcoming, offering the promise of shelter. "There's a cabin about 5 miles north," Kieran said as they reached the tree line. "A safe house I maintain for situations like this. We can rest there, plan our next move." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes it had become a proper storm, soaking them both and washing away any scent trail they might have left. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was small but well maintained. Kieran had clearly stocked it recently. There were supplies, dry clothes, even a cache of weapons. He moved around the single room with economical efficiency, lighting the fire and checking the windows while Lyra collapsed into a chair. "Here." He handed her a thick blanket and a cup of something warm. "Drink this. It'll help with the magical exhaustion." The liquid was sweet and herbal, with an underlying strength that seemed to flow directly into her bones. Almost immediately, the worst of the trembling stopped. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for protecting me, for believing me, for what any mate would do." He settled into the chair across from her, firelight dancing across his features. "You don't need to thank me for that, Lyra." "Mate," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. I still don't understand how this is possible, how you knew, how you found me." "The bond has been there since the night your village burned," he said quietly. "I felt your magic break, felt your anguish across hundreds of miles. It took me 2 years to track you down because you were so good at hiding, but I never stopped feeling the pull. And you never thought maybe the bond was wrong, maybe it was just proximity or desperation or—" "Never." His certainty was absolute. "I've lived 200 years, Lyra. I've felt attraction, affection, even love. This is none of those things. This is recognition. This is coming home." 200 years. Alpha kings lived longer than ordinary wolves, she knew, but hearing the number still made her head spin. He'd had centuries to find a mate, centuries of choices, and somehow the bond had chosen her. Broken, traumatized, guilty her. "I don't understand what you see in me," she whispered. "I'm not strong or brave or special. I couldn't even save my own family." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was soft with old pain. "I had a mate once before," he said, 2 centuries ago. Her name was Ilara, and she was everything the pack expected. Noble-born, powerful, confident, beautiful. Something cold and sharp twisted in Lyra's chest. Jealousy, she realized with surprise. She was jealous of a woman who'd been dead for 200 years. What happened to her? "She died 3 days before our mating ceremony, assassinated by political enemies who thought killing her would weaken my claim to the throne." His hands clenched into fists. "I was too late to save her, too focused on diplomacy and politics to see the threat until it was too late." "I'm sorry," Lyra said softly. "For 200 years I thought that was it. One mate, one chance, one failure." He looked up, silver eyes finding hers. "I threw myself into ruling, into protecting my territory, into hunting down men like Blackthorn who prey on the innocent. But I never felt the bond again, never felt that recognition. Until that night. Until you." He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every line of his body. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who survived the unsurvivable. I see someone who spent 3 years punishing herself for things that were never her fault. I see kindness and strength and a power that runs deeper than you know. I see someone," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "who used the last of her strength to protect a stranger tonight, who threw herself between danger and someone she barely knows because it was the right thing to do." Tears burned behind Lyra's eyes. "You make it sound noble. It wasn't noble. I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, sweetheart. It's doing the right thing despite the fear." He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his larger one. "You are the strongest person I've ever met, and I've waited 200 years to find you." The rain drummed against the cabin roof, steady and soothing. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the small space with warmth and dancing light. And between them, the golden thread of the mate bond hummed with contentment. For the first time in 3 years, Lyra felt safe. "What happens now?" she asked. Kieran's thumb traced across her knuckles, sending sparks racing up her arm. "Now we rest. Tomorrow we figure out how to deal with Blackthorn permanently. And after that—" "After that?" He smiled, and it was soft and patient and full of promise. "After that, we go home." Home. Such a simple word, but it hit her like a revelation. She'd been wandering for so long, hiding for so long, that she'd forgotten what home felt like. But sitting here in this small cabin, with rain falling outside and firelight dancing on the walls, with Kieran's hand warm in hers and the mate bond singing between them, this felt like home. For the first time in years, Lyra began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be found. Lyra woke to the sound of hoofbeats. The fire had burned low during the night, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Kieran was already awake, standing at the window with predatory stillness, his entire body coiled for action. "How many?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder of approaching horses. 50, maybe more." His voice was grim, silver eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "Blackthorn himself is with them." Terror flooded her system like ice water. Lord Marcus Blackthorn wasn't just another noble with a grudge. He was one of the most powerful men in 3 kingdoms, backed by wealth, political connections, and a private army that answered to no crown but his own. "We can still run," she said, scrambling to her feet. "There's the back window, the forest." "No." Kieran turned to face her, and what she saw in his expression made her breath catch. Not fear, not even concern, certainty. "No more running, Lyra. It ends here." "You don't understand. Blackthorn isn't like his men. He has magic of his own, dark magic. He's killed Alpha Kings before." "Has he?" Kieran's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because I'm still here." Before she could ask what he meant, the hoofbeats stopped. Silence stretched between them like a held breath, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the whisper of wind through the trees. Then Blackthorn's voice cut through the night like a knife. "I know you're in there, little witch. I can smell your fear from here." His words carried the cultured accent of nobility, but underneath lay something rotten, something that made Lyra's skin crawl. "Come out now, and I might let your protector live long enough to watch." Kieran moved to the door, his hand resting on the handle. "When I give the signal, I want you to get to the back of the cabin and stay low. Whatever happens, whatever you see, don't come outside until it's over. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. You're not leaving me." He turned back to her, and the gentleness in his expression was at odds with the deadly promise in his stance. "You're protecting yourself. There's a difference." "Kieran." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" The mate bond hummed between them, warm and steady and absolutely certain. Despite everything, the terror clawing at her chest, the impossible odds, the memory of Blackthorn's cruelty, she found herself nodding. "I trust you." He kissed her then, soft and brief but filled with promise. "I'll come back to you," he whispered against her lips. "I swear it." Before she could respond, he was opening the door and stepping into the night. Lyra pressed herself against the back wall, heart hammering as she listened to the exchange outside. "Lord Blackthorn." Kieran's voice carried casual authority, as if he were greeting a guest at court rather than facing down a private army. "You're a long way from your territory." "Not far enough, it seems." Blackthorn's laugh was cultured and cold. "Do you know what you're protecting, boy? Do you have any idea what that little witch has cost me?" "Enlighten me." "My son, my heir. She poisoned him with her foul magic, turned his own blood against him, watched him die choking on it while she smiled." "Your son died because he was a rapist and a coward who bit off more than he could chew." Kieran's words cut through the night air like steel. "If you're looking for someone to blame for Thomas's death, try a mirror." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Blackthorn spoke again, and his voice was deadly quiet. "You defend her crimes. That makes you complicit. That makes you mine to punish." "Does it?" There was something different in Kieran's voice now, something that made the hair on the back of Lyra's neck stand up. "Tell me, Blackthorn, do you know who I am?" "Some minor lord with delusions of heroism. It doesn't matter. You'll die screaming either way." Kieran laughed, and the sound sent shivers racing down Lyra's spine. "Minor lord, that's rich." Power flooded the clearing like a wave, so strong that even from inside the cabin, Lyra could feel it pressing against her skin. Ancient power, primal power, the kind that made lesser beings kneel without conscious thought. "Let me properly introduce myself," Kieran continued, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to echo from the very stones. "Kieran Blackmore, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, protector of the 5 clans, and the man who's been hunting you for 2 years." The silence stretched so long that Lyra began to worry someone had died. Then Blackthorn's voice came again, smaller now, but no less venomous. "Impossible. The Alpha King is a myth, a bedtime story to frighten children." "Am I?" The sound of bones cracking filled the air, followed by the soft whisper of transformation. When Kieran spoke again, his voice had dropped to something barely human. "Would you like me to show you exactly how real I am?" Chaos erupted outside. Men screamed and horses reared, the sounds of panic and terror filling the night. But underneath it all was something else, a roar that shook the very foundations of the cabin, so deep and powerful that it seemed to resonate in Lyra's bones. She couldn't stay hidden, not any more, not when Kieran was out there facing impossible odds alone. Moving to the front window, she peered through a crack in the shutters and immediately wished she hadn't. The clearing was a battlefield. Kieran, in his wolf form but larger than before, nearly the size of a draft horse, moved through Blackthorn's men like a force of nature. But there were so many of them, and they weren't ordinary soldiers. These men moved with inhuman speed and strength, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. Dark magic. Blackthorn had enhanced his forces with stolen power, turning them into something between human and monster. And they were winning. Kieran was magnificent, deadly, unstoppable, but even Alpha Kings had limits. Already she could see blood matting his silver fur, could hear the laboured rhythm of his breathing. He was taking damage faster than he could heal, and there were still dozens of enhanced soldiers pressing in from all sides. In the centre of it all stood Blackthorn himself, tall and elegant and utterly untouched by the violence around him. Dark energy writhed around his hands like living smoke, and his eyes burned with malevolent satisfaction. "Is this the best the mighty Alpha King can do?" he called out, voice carrying easily over the sounds of battle. "I expected more from the stories." Kieran's response was to tear through 3 more soldiers, but Lyra could see the exhaustion in his movements. He was slowing down, and Blackthorn knew it. "Perhaps you need motivation," the Lord continued, raising one hand toward the cabin. Dark energy began to gather around his fingers, building to a killing strike. "Let's see how you fight when your little witch is ash." Time slowed to honey-thick moments. Lyra saw the bolt of dark magic building, saw it aimed directly at the cabin walls that wouldn't stand for a second against that kind of power, saw Kieran turning toward them, saw the desperate fear in his silver eyes as he realised what was happening. He started to move, but he was too far away, too badly wounded, too slow. The bolt launched toward the cabin like a falling star, and Lyra stepped outside. Power erupted from her like a golden sun, not the gentle healing magic she'd known her whole life, but something fierce and protective and absolutely unstoppable. Light blazed from her skin, her hair, her very breath, turning night into day and sending Blackthorn's dark magic scattering like smoke before a hurricane. The enhanced soldiers closest to her simply vanished, their stolen magic unravelling in the face of her power. Others stumbled backward, crying out in languages she didn't recognise as the dark energy sustaining them began to fail. But Lyra only had eyes for Blackthorn. "You want me," she called out, her voice carrying impossible authority. "Here I am." The Lord's face had gone pale, his elegant composure cracking for the first time. "What are you?" "I'm the woman whose village you burned," she said, taking a step forward. Golden light trailed behind her like wings, and where her feet touched the ground, flowers bloomed despite the late season. "I'm the daughter of the healers you murdered. I'm the witch you've been hunting." Another step. The remaining soldiers were fleeing now, their enhanced strength no match for the power radiating from her skin. "And I'm the mate of the Alpha King you tried to kill." Blackthorn raised his hands, dark energy swirling around him like a shield. You're nothing. A broken little girl playing with forces beyond her understanding. Maybe, Lyra agreed, but broken doesn't mean powerless. She reached out with her magic, not to attack, but to heal, to mend, to fix what had been damaged by years of dark sorcery and stolen power. Blackthorn screamed as the corruption in his magic began to unravel, as every spell he'd ever cast with stolen energy turned back on itself. Dark veins appeared along his skin, spreading like poison as his own power consumed him from within. "Stop!" he gasped, falling to his knees. "Please, I can pay you. I can give you anything." "You can't give me back my family," Lyra said quietly. "You can't undo the years of fear and running and believing I was cursed." She knelt beside him, placing one glowing hand on his forehead. He tried to pull away, but he was too weak now, too consumed by his own unravelling magic. "But I can make sure you never hurt anyone else again." The healing magic flooded through him, burning away every trace of dark energy, every stolen spell, every enhancement he'd ever made. When it was over, he would be completely ordinary. No magic, no supernatural strength, nothing but a bitter old man with too many enemies and no power to protect himself. It was a mercy he didn't deserve. Blackthorn collapsed unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Around the clearing, his remaining men were either fled or incapacitated, their dark enhancements gone with their lord's power. Silence fell like a blanket over the forest. Lyra swayed on her feet, the massive expenditure of magic leaving her dizzy and disoriented. She'd never used power like that before, had never even known she possessed it. But in the moment when Kieran's life hung in the balance, it had come as naturally as breathing. Warm hands caught her as her knees buckled, steadying her against a familiar chest. Kieran had transformed back to human form, though he was bloodied and exhausted, his clothes torn and his skin marked with dozens of small wounds. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, trying to reach for her healing magic only to find it nearly depleted. "I'm fine," he assured her, though his voice was rough with pain. "Nothing that won't heal on its own. But you—" He cupped her face in his hands, silver eyes searching hers. "What you just did. I couldn't let him hurt you." The words came out as barely a whisper. "I couldn't watch you die protecting me." Something fierce and proud and utterly devastating flashed across his expression. "Do you know what this means?" "That I'm more powerful than I thought." "That you're not broken," he said softly, "that you never were. Power like that, pure, protective, healing magic, it can't come from someone whose heart is corrupt. It can't come from someone who brings death wherever she goes." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I still failed them. My family." "You tried to save them. That's what matters." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she didn't realize were falling. "You've been carrying guilt that was never yours to bear, punishing yourself for being unable to perform miracles. But tonight you chose to fight instead of run. You chose to protect instead of hide." His voice dropped to a whisper, filled with wonder and pride and something deeper. "Tonight you chose to trust the bond between us." The mate bond hummed in response to his words, warm and golden and absolutely certain. For the first time since that terrible night 3 years ago, Lyra felt the crushing weight of guilt begin to lift from her shoulders. "Now, do you believe you're who I've been searching for?" he asked softly, echoing the words from their first meeting. Lyra looked around the clearing, at the unconscious form of the man who'd haunted her nightmares, at the scattered remnants of his army, at the flowers blooming where her power had touched the earth. She thought about the shield magic that had come so naturally when Kieran was threatened, about the healing light that had burned away years of corruption and dark magic. She thought about the way Kieran looked at her, like she was precious, like she was worth finding, like she was exactly who he'd hoped she would be. "I believe you," she whispered. "I believe in us." He smiled then, brilliant and relieved and full of promise. "Good, because I have something to ask you." "What?" Instead of answering, he sank to one knee in the flower-strewn grass, pulling something from his pocket. A ring, simple silver set with a stone that seemed to capture starlight. "Lyra Ashworth," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion and blood loss. "Will you come home with me? Will you be my mate, my queen, my everything?" The yes rose in her throat like sunlight, but before she could speak, she had to ask one last question. "Are you certain, even knowing what I am, what I've done?" "Especially knowing what you are." His silver eyes held hers, absolutely certain, absolutely sure. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You're kind and brave and powerful beyond imagining. You're the woman who stood between me and death tonight, who chose love over fear." "You're everything I never dared hope for," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I've waited 200 years to find you." Lyra looked down at him, this powerful, patient, impossible man who'd seen her at her worst and decided she was worth fighting for, who'd tracked her across kingdoms and waited years for her to trust him, who'd faced down an army to keep her safe and still thought she was the brave one. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, with all the certainty in her heart. "Yes." The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, warm and perfect and right, and when Kieran stood and kissed her, soft and deep and full of promise, she felt the last of her walls crumble. She was found, she was chosen, she was home. The great hall of Shadowmere fell silent as the massive doors swung open. Lyra's hand tightened on Kieran's arm, her heart hammering against her ribs as dozens of eyes turned their way. The Northern Territory's pack house was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Ancient stone walls that seemed to pulse with their own power, tapestries depicting centuries of pack history, and wolves who carried themselves with the deadly grace of apex predators. These were Kieran's people, his family, his pack, and they were all staring at her. "Breathe," Kieran murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "They can smell fear, but they can also smell power. Show them who you really are." Who she really was. 3 days ago, she would have said she was nobody, a broken healer hiding from her past. Now, wearing the Alpha King's ring and feeling his steady presence beside her, she was beginning to remember. "Alpha King?" A woman stepped forward from the assembled crowd, her silver hair braided with ceremonial beads, and her eyes the pale blue of winter ice. "Welcome home." "Astrid." Kieran inclined his head respectfully. "I'd like you to meet my mate, Lyra Ashworth." The pack's reaction was immediate and mixed. Some faces showed surprise, others curiosity, and a few displayed barely concealed scepticism. Lyra caught whispers that cut like knives. "Servant girl," "nobody," "where's her breeding?" But Astrid's expression remained neutral, assessing. "Miss Ashworth, we've heard rumours of your circumstances." "What kind of rumours?" Lyra asked, proud that her voice came out steady. "That you're the witch Lord Blackthorn was hunting, that you've been living under a false identity for 3 years, that our Alpha King fought an entire army to protect you." Astrid's pale eyes never wavered. "The question, my dear, is whether you're worthy of such devotion." Heat flooded Lyra's cheeks, but before she could respond, Kieran stepped forward. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees, and several pack members took involuntary steps backward. "Careful, Astrid," he said quietly. "You're speaking about your future queen." "A queen should be able to defend herself," Astrid replied smoothly, "especially one with such interesting enemies." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Lyra felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her, the unspoken test in every watching face. They needed to see what she was made of, needed proof that she was more than just some helpless girl their Alpha had taken pity on. She thought about running, about making excuses and retreating to whatever guest quarters they prepared. It would be easier, safer, less likely to end in humiliation. But then she felt Kieran's hand on her back, steady and supportive, and remembered the way he'd looked at her when she'd stepped between him and Blackthorn's magic, like she was everything. "You're right," Lyra said, stepping forward. "A queen should defend herself and her people." She closed her eyes and reached for the power that had blazed so brilliantly 3 nights ago. For a terrifying moment she felt nothing, just empty space where the magic should have been. Then warmth flickered in her chest, growing stronger as she let go of her fear and embraced what she'd learned about herself. Golden light began to emanate from her skin, soft at first, but building to something that made the very air shimmer. Gasps echoed through the hall as pack members felt the pure healing energy washing over them like a benediction. "I am Lyra Ashworth," she said, her voice carrying newfound authority. "Daughter of Marcus and Elena Ashworth, last of the Thornfield healers. I have the power to mend what is broken, to cleanse what is corrupted, to protect what is precious." The light grew brighter, and now she could feel the pack's injuries, old wounds that had never properly healed, scars from battles fought and won, the deep ache of loss that every warrior carried. Without thinking, she reached out with her magic and began to heal them all. A young wolf who'd been favouring his left leg straightened in surprise as torn muscles knitted back together. An older woman touched her face in wonder as a scar from some long-ago battle faded to nothing. Throughout the hall, groans of relief filled the air as chronic pain simply vanished. "And I," Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "chose to stand and fight rather than run when Lord Blackthorn came for my mate. I chose love over fear, protection over self-preservation. If that doesn't make me worthy, then your definition of worth and mine differ greatly." The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, Astrid sank to one knee. "My queen," she said simply. The rest of the pack followed suit, a ripple of submission and respect flowing through the great hall. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes as she realised what this meant: acceptance, belonging, home. Kieran's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Well done," he murmured, pride evident in every syllable. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. A commotion at the entrance drew every eye, and Lyra's heart sank as she recognised the figure striding through the doors. Captain Roderick somehow escaped from the tavern, flanked by a dozen armed men. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. They moved with the inhuman grace of the enhanced fighters Blackthorn had used, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. "How touching!" Roderick sneered, his scarred face twisted with malice. "The witch plays queen while her victim's blood still stains her hands." The pack moved as one, positioning themselves between the intruders and their leaders, but Roderick raised his hand. Dark energy crackled around his fingers, not Blackthorn's magic, but something else, something older and hungrier. "I wouldn't," he warned. "One wrong move and I reduced this entire hall to ash." "What do you want, Roderick?" Kieran's voice was deadly calm, but Lyra could feel the tension radiating from his body. "Justice!" the captain spat. "The witch murdered Lord Blackthorn's heir. She corrupted our lord with her foul magic, left him broken and powerless. She's a plague on this world, and I intend to cure it." "Blackthorn's son died of his own cruelty," Lyra said, stepping forward despite Kieran's protective instinct. "And your lord lost his power because it was stolen in the first place. I simply returned it to its rightful owners." "Lies!" Roderick's magic flared, dark energy swirling around him like smoke. "You're a murderer and a witch, and you've corrupted the Alpha King himself with your poison." "She's my mate," Kieran growled, his own power beginning to leak into the air. "Threaten her again and see what happens." "Your mate?" Roderick laughed, harsh and grating. "She's bewitched you, made you weak. The great Alpha King, brought low by a broken little healer who couldn't even save her own family." The words hit Lyra like physical blows, dredging up every insecurity she'd fought to overcome. For a moment she wavered, old shame and guilt rising in her chest, but then she felt the pack's eyes on her, not with judgment or disappointment, but with expectation. They believed in her. Kieran believed in her. And after everything she'd been through, everything she'd survived and overcome, she was beginning to believe in herself. "You're right," she said quietly, and Roderick's triumphant expression faltered. "I couldn't save my family. I couldn't stop Blackthorn from burning my village. I couldn't prevent any of the pain and loss that shaped me." She stepped closer, golden light beginning to gather around her hands. "But I saved Kieran when an army tried to kill him. I healed the corruption in Blackthorn's magic. I chose to fight instead of hide, to love instead of fear, to trust instead of run." The light grew brighter, and she could see panic flickering in Roderick's eyes as his dark magic began to weaken in the face of her power. "You want to call me broken? Fine, call me broken, but broken doesn't mean worthless, and surviving doesn't make me weak." Her voice carried absolute certainty now, ringing through the great hall like a bell. "I am Kieran's mate, chosen queen of the Northern Territories, and you are not welcome here." She reached out with her magic, not to attack, but to cleanse, to heal the corruption that had twisted Roderick's men, to break the dark bonds that held them to their master's will. The enhanced soldiers collapsed as their stolen power deserted them, unconscious, but finally free. Roderick screamed in rage and desperation as his own magic turned against him, dark energy consuming itself from within. When the light faded, he lay motionless on the stone floor, breathing but utterly defeated. The pack erupted in cheers, voices raised in celebration of their new queen's victory. But Lyra only had eyes for Kieran, who was looking at her like she'd just performed a miracle. "How does it feel?" he asked softly, pulling her into his arms. "How does what feel?" "Being exactly who you're meant to be." Lyra considered the question, taking in the great hall filled with pack members who now looked at her with respect and admiration. The ring on her finger caught the light, a tangible reminder of the choice she'd made and the future she'd chosen. "It feels like coming home," she said finally. Kieran's smile was brilliant, filled with pride and love and absolute certainty. "Good, because we have a kingdom to rule." Later that evening, after Roderick and his men had been dealt with and the celebration had begun in earnest, Lyra found herself on the castle's highest balcony. The view stretched for miles in every direction, forests and mountains and villages where people lived and loved and built lives worth protecting. Her people, now, her responsibility. Kieran joined her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind and pulling her back against his chest. "Second thoughts?" he asked teasingly. "About you? Never." She leaned into his warmth, marvelling at how right this felt, how perfectly she fit against him. "About being a queen? Ask me again in a year." He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You'll be magnificent. You already are." "I had a good teacher," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Someone who saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself. Someone who waited 2 years and fought an army just to prove I was worth finding." "Someone who loves you," he said simply. The words hung between them, precious and perfect and absolutely true. Lyra reached up to cup his face, thumb tracing across his cheekbone. "I love you too," she whispered. "My king, my mate, my home." When he kissed her this time, it was with the promise of forever, deep and claiming, and full of all the tomorrows stretching out ahead of them. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the kingdom settled into peaceful sleep, Lyra finally understood what it meant to be found. She was exactly where she belonged. 3 months later, Lyra stood in the palace gardens watching young wolves learn to control their shifting for the first time. "Remember," she called to a girl who couldn't be more than 16, her voice patient and encouraging. "Don't fight the change, let it flow through you like water." The girl, Sarah her name was, nodded and closed her eyes, concentration written across her features. A moment later, golden fur rippled across her skin as she found her wolf form for the first time. The other young pack members cheered, and Lyra felt her heart swell with pride. "Well done," she said warmly. "How does it feel?" "Like coming home," Sarah breathed, and the words sent warmth spiralling through Lyra's chest. She understood that feeling now, understood what it meant to find the place where you belonged, the people who saw you truly and loved you anyway. It had taken 3 years of running and hiding, but she'd finally found her way home. "Your Majesty!" A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts, and Lyra turned to find Marcus approaching. Not the tavern-keeper from Millhaven, but Marcus Greycliffe, Kieran's beta and oldest friend. "The Alpha King requests your presence in the council chamber." "Of course." Lyra brushed dirt from her simple dress, a far cry from the elaborate gowns the seamstresses kept trying to convince her to wear. She'd discovered that being queen didn't mean abandoning herself. It meant being the best version of who she already was. The council chamber was warm and inviting, afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows and falling across maps and documents scattered across a massive oak table. Kieran looked up as she entered, and the smile that spread across his face still made her knees weak after all these weeks. "How go the lesson?" he asked, rising to pull her into his arms. Sarah shifted for the first time today. Lyra melted into his embrace, marvelling at how right this felt. How perfectly they fit together. You should have seen her face. Pure joy. "And how is their teacher holding up?" "Tired but happy." She pulled back to study his expression, noting the tension around his eyes that only she would recognise. "What's troubling you?" "Nothing troubling, exactly." Kieran guided her to sit beside him, his hand finding hers automatically. "News from the south. Blackthorn's territories have been redistributed among lords who actually deserve them. The enhanced soldiers we freed have been integrated into various packs, and most are thriving." "That's wonderful news." "It is." His thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "There's something else, though. Several other kingdoms have sent envoys. Word of what happened here has spread. The Alpha King's mate who can heal corruption, cleanse dark magic, protect the innocent." Understanding dawned. "They want help. They want you." His silver eyes held hers, serious but hopeful. "There are other Blackthorns out there, Lyra, other corrupted lords using stolen power to hurt innocent people, and you're the only one who can stop them." The weight of that responsibility should have terrified her. 3 months ago, it would have sent her running for the nearest exit. But now, surrounded by the warmth of home and the steady certainty of Kieran's love, she found herself nodding. "When do we leave?" Kieran's smile was brilliant, filled with pride and love and absolute certainty that she was exactly who she was meant to be. "We don't. I do the travelling, handle the politics and negotiations. You stay here, safe, and heal anyone I bring back who needs your help." "Absolutely not." Lyra's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "We're mates, Kieran, partners. We face these challenges together. It could be dangerous. So was facing down Blackthorn's army. So was accepting a mate bond with an Alpha King. So was choosing to stop running and start fighting." She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I'm not the broken girl hiding in taverns anymore. I'm your mate, your queen, and someone with power enough to make a difference. We do this together." The silence stretched between them, filled with the kind of understanding that only came from truly knowing someone. Then Kieran nodded, his expression shifting to something fierce and protective and infinitely proud. "Together," he agreed. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video if you're enjoying this paranormal romance story. That evening found them in their private chambers, firelight dancing across stone walls and casting everything in warm, golden light. Lyra sat curled against Kieran's side on the massive bed, her head on his shoulder as they planned their future. Kingdoms to visit, people to help, a life built on something greater than just survival. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what would have happened if you hadn't found me?" "No." His answer was immediate, absolute. I would have kept searching until I did. Even if it took another 200 years. Even if it took eternity. He shifted to look down at her, silver eyes reflecting the firelight. You were worth waiting for, Lyra, worth searching for, worth everything I went through to find you. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. Grateful tears. I spent so long thinking I was cursed, that everyone I touched was doomed to suffer. I never imagined someone would see past that to who I really was. I didn't see past it, Kieran said softly. I saw through it, saw the woman who tried to heal half a village even when her power was breaking, saw the strength it took to survive when everyone you loved was gone, saw the courage it took to trust someone again after being hurt so badly. His hand traced across her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. You weren't broken, sweetheart. You were grieving, and there's nothing wrong with taking time to heal. And now you're exactly who you were always meant to be. My mate, my queen, my everything. When he kissed her, it was with all the tenderness in the world, soft and deep and full of promises yet to be made. And when she kissed him back, it was with the absolute certainty that this was forever. They made love that night with a passion that bordered on worship, two souls finally, completely joined. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the firelight, Lyra marvelled at the journey that had brought her here. From the broken girl hiding in shadows to the woman lying in an alpha king's arms, accepted and loved and home. Kieran, she whispered into the peaceful silence, thank you. For what? For finding me, for refusing to give up, for seeing something worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. For proving that sometimes the people we're looking for are closer than we think. His arms tightened around her, protective and possessive and infinitely gentle. You found exactly who you were looking for too, you know. Did I? You found yourself. His voice was soft with wonder. The real you, the one who was always there, just waiting to be brave enough to step into the light. Lyra smiled against his skin, feeling truth in those words that resonated in her very bones. She had found herself, the healer, the protector, the woman strong enough to love and be loved in return. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he replied. My queen, my mate, my home. Outside their window, the kingdom slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. In the months to come, they would face new challenges, help other kingdoms, build a legacy of healing and hope that would span generations. But for now, they were simply two people who had found each other across time and distance and impossible odds. Two souls who had learned that being found was sometimes exactly the same as finding yourself. And as dawn broke over the northern territories, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility, Lyra finally understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. She wasn't the girl they were looking for. She was the woman they had found, and that made all the difference. What's your favourite paranormal romance trope? The fated mates bond or the powerful alpha protector? Let me know in the comments below. If you love these immersive romantic stories, don't forget to subscribe for more magical love stories every day.